This is the Concealed Carry Podcast, Season 8, Episode 7. And welcome to the Concealed Carry Podcast, part of the concealedcarry.com network of shows, brought to you by Mountain Man Medical. Today is Wednesday, March 15th, 2023, as of the recording of this episode. And I am your humble host, Riley Bowman.
Hello, Riley.
And we have our also very, very humble co-host, Matthew Marister.
What's up, guys? Glad to be here with you.
Glad to be with you as well. On this special episode today, we are talking about the concept of not blasting away at targets. Let's instead just shoot the targets. There's a subtle and distinct and yet important difference there. This is coming to you in the context of a recent Shooter Ready Challenge video that we put out there a couple weeks ago. And so today's episode is sponsored by laserapp.com. LASRAPP.com is the place to go to learn more about the fantastic laser software. There's Laser Classic and Laser X, both available. I like using the Laser X version because I can run it on my iPad, which is awesome. Works very well for my workflow. But some people like to still run it on their Windows-based computers or laptops, and they can use the Classic Edition. Both are heavily loaded with all kinds of options and feature sets. Laser X or Laser App software is the way to measure data while dry fire practicing, both in terms of hits and accuracy, but also in time. And that's something that is challenging to do sometimes in dry fire. So check it out today. Go to laserapp.com. I hope that you'll consider giving them a try. Again, lasrapp.com. Today's episode also sponsored by Barrel Block, which you can find at barrelblock.com, no C, so barrelblok.com. Sometimes I have one sitting around here. I don't today. Barrel Block is our preferred dry fire tool. Actually, I've got one installed. Got to be careful with how I do this on the YouTube so we don't get the YouTube algorithms upset. But if you look there, you'll see got my Barrel Block installed in a P320 X5 Legion here that I was using for dry fire practice. That is a little bit of extra insurance and safety that you can have at the tip of your fingers for very, very low investment costs. Go to barrelblock.com and make sure that you are being safe in your dry fire practice today. Of course, it doesn't replace safe practices and following the safety rules, but it's a nice little extra bit of insurance. I would strongly recommend you use Barrel Block. Again, barrelblock.com. And then I mentioned that we're talking today about some concepts featured in the most recent Shooter Ready Challenge video, which you can find at shooterreadychallenge.com. There's actually quite a repository of dry fire videos there now. Tons of ideas, concepts, instructional videos, things to just help give you ideas and tips and better ways of conducting your dry fire practice. Sometimes dry fire can get stagnant. Sometimes just having a little bit of extra inspiration can be real beneficial. So you can go over to shooterreadychallenge.com and watch the most recent video, which is called Smoke and Hope, which is based on a Steel Challenge stage. The Steel Challenge is a competition discipline that's kind of sometimes referred to as the Formula One equivalent of shooting, in that it is all about pure, raw, dirty, nasty speed of shooting steel targets as absolutely as fast as you possibly can. And I'll tell you, when you watch the top people do it, it's really an impressive feat to see. But one of the things, like the Smoke and Hope Steel Challenge stage, if you're not familiar, it actually involves 4 quite large, I think they're 18 by 24 inch steel plates placed at a little, like right around 10 yards, maybe a little bit less even. And you got 2 to the left of you and 2 to the right of you, and then straight down center right in front of you, down at like maybe 18 yards, there's I think it's either an 8, I think it's a 10-inch plate, actually, a round one. Okay. And that's actually the stop plate. So if you're not familiar with steel challenge competition, there's 5 plates. You can shoot them in any order you want, except that you don't want to shoot the stop plate till you've shot everything else. Because once you shoot the stop plate, your final plate, then your run is over, and whatever time is generated, that's what gets recorded. And if you've missed anything along the way, those are penalties. So in Smoke and Hope, you're going to have 2 large, relatively close plates to the left of you, 2 to the right of you. You're going to want to shoot those 4, and then finish on the stop plate right in front and center, which is considerably smaller and quite a bit of ways away, relatively speaking. So Smoke and Hope encourages you to go really fast. And then, of course, you got to put the brakes on in a big way to hit that stop plate, because it's a lot of throttle control, big time, going as fast about it. Like this, frankly, is about the fastest still challenge stage that there is, especially on those first 4 targets. And then you got to slow down and hit that little one, right? But here's what's interesting, Matthew. Quite often, you'll see shooters actually, well, you'll see misses on the smaller stop plate, but you'll also see quite a few shooters missing the huge, right in your face, up close steel plates. And I have a theory on that, and the theory is that they're just simply blasting away at those targets as opposed to actually just shooting them. And there's a subtle and yet distinct and yet important distinction there. And so it's really, and frankly, so why we're talking about this today is I think there's some great applicability to no matter what kind of shooting you do, or the type of shooter that you are, or the context that you carry or use a gun in. So whether you're a competition oriented shooter or concealed carry focused, defensive focused, law enforcement, whatever, okay, there is an important lesson to be found in something like this Smoke and Hope Steel Challenge stage. And I mean, there's a lot of lessons we could look at, but today we're going to focus on the idea that it's really tempting and easy to fall for the trap of just blasting away at brown or white or black or whatever your particular target color is. I mean, for instance, you're wearing like a blue shirt today and you've got some writing on it. I'm wearing this black shirt from FTA, which, I mean, if you took away this logo, and frankly, this logo would probably have a tendency of pulling your eyes away from the center of my chest, assuming if I was your target, meaning like some kind of human threat. And actually, that would be a little bit off center from where you'd probably ideally want to shoot. But this is probably where your eyes would be strongly drawn to if you're not careful. Okay. But if we took this away and you just had a plain field of black and color, it's a lot more difficult to actually focus on a precise point on this target and bring the gun to it and shoot, good, accurate shots. It's the common pitfall is that shooters will recognize that their gun is on target, but they're really just sort of seeing black or brown or white and then blasting away. And that often results in less than desirable hits and outcomes.
Yeah. I when you kind of introduced this topic before we went live, I thought that was interesting because the way you did kind of differentiate it, because I think in as you were talking, I was thinking surely there is the competitive. We're talking about running a steel challenge, so there's the competitive aspect of this, and but even so, there is. I'm thinking about defensive shootings, and you kind of hit on it as far as like your eyes are naturally drawn to certain things, and if it's not a steel plate that's all one color, if it is a threat that presents itself, we talk about the hands are a lot of times in officer involved shootings, suspects' hands get shot. And I think part of that is, if you're holding a weapon, you're probably holding it kind of center mass in front of you. So if you're kind of tendency is to aim center mass, you're likely to hit hands. But I think there's also an aspect of this that, our eyes, are drawn to certain things, and that might be a firearm or the weapon in a certain case. And so, yeah, when we do focus on something small, we can better, you know, we can better look at our sights and make sure it's on a specific point rather than just a big broad area. And it might seem like it's easy to shoot a big black silhouette target, but I know you've had this issue before, seen it with students, like somebody's having difficulty grouping, and it's because you have kind of like this, just like a big blank target. And as soon as you put a dot and you say like, hey, I want you to group it on this dot, they can do it because now they have a point. So I think there's a lot that can be kind of, we could go into as far as like, there is a difference between just kind of like putting your sights over and saying there's black behind it, and my target's black and I'm just going to start cranking away, and actually having your sights on a fixed point of that target. And yeah, I kind of like how you kind of differentiated the two.
Yeah, I'm thinking of like an actual real world example of where people end up just blasting away at a target. Actually, we get a lot of examples of this, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you want to look at it. I mean, it's always nice to have examples, right? We can learn from that stuff, but we probably see it more often than what we should. And what I mean by that is a lot of officer-involved shootings. We see a lot of badge cams, and like I pulled one up here that I was actually trying to find a different one that's a great example. We could even show it on the podcast potentially here. I know those that are listening only wouldn't probably be able to make sense of it, but let me just go ahead and just describe what is commonly seen in some of these officer-involved shootings. And again, not that this purely singles out police officers only. There's probably all kinds of civilian shootings that are not all that different to some extent, but we just don't get as many video examples of those, and certainly we don't get video examples of those from first person view, and that's actually an important distinction, because from a first person view of like a badge cam, we can really get a sense of what the officers fundamentals are like, or how effective they're actually being with the shots that they're fired. And there's lots of examples of basically just kind of blasting away at targets, at threats. And by that, like there's one I was trying to think or trying to find its example of, and I don't remember where it happened. I remember that the perpetrator that gets shot, he's kind of on a grassy area beside an apartment building. Officer rolls up in his vehicle, exits, draws gun, issues commands, and the man is armed. I think he pulls a gun out, if I recall. It may have been I'm pretty sure this was a gun. He whips around with a gun. Officer starts discharging his weapon, and you can watch in the video just how like there's a total lack of control over the gun, meaning that it just is kind of flailing about in his hands. Bam, 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 bam. Shots going all over the place. And it takes like a dozen or more shots for this officer to connect enough times to put a stop to the threat. And now again, I remember watching this, and I just don't remember the exact example where it happened, when it happened. But the reality is that this example I just described is not alone. There's many others that are not all that dissimilar. And so the example of like what's being displayed there is threat is perceived, and whether it's more of an emotional, like a lack of emotional control, meaning that, oh crap is hitting the fan and I'm purely reacting, drawing gun and just letting it rip because I'm, I call it panic firing. You're just sort of panicking because my life is hanging in the balance here, and I haven't been tested enough or put to the fire enough or proven my skills enough to, other than just to grab a gun and just start wailing away on the trigger. Or there, and that's probably what it is a lot of times. But part of that too could be, and this is the other part of that statement is, or explanation is that they perceive threat, and you see this torso, this body, coming at you or threatening you, shooting at you, whatever, and you just perceive that the gun is somewhere on there, and you're just letting shots rip. You're just sending them without very much discipline as far as pick point on target, lock on eyes. Okay, that's called convergence. You got to converge your eyes on a specific point on a target and bring the gun to that point. And then, depending on what you perceive through your sight picture, as far as relative target size and distance, you apply the appropriate level of throttle control, to get good hits on that target. But the thing here is I mean, this is super important from a liability standpoint, because when we just blast away at a target and our discipline and control of those shots is not what it needs to be, there's obviously greater likelihood of misses, and every miss potentially has a lawyer attached to it, meaning lawsuits, civil lawsuits, potentially the ramifications of having to live for the rest of your life with knowing that an innocent party was severely injured or killed. We had an officer-involved shooting here in Denver not too long ago outside of a bar or nightclub or whatever late at night. And, officer fired a number of shots and hit multiple bystanders. That's a problem, right? And that's it. And that's another example of this sort of thing I'm talking about here. So the flip side of that is, and actually it came up in my suggested feed, but there's another video of an officer engaging a threat at a pretty good distance. It's actually one that John Correa uses as an example of a questionable officer-involved shooting, partly because of the distance, meaning that this threat is far enough away and is running away, and the officer engages, and it's a difficult shot. We're talking like 30 plus yards, and I mean, not that can't be done, but the officer is kind of moving at a pretty good clip himself, and then pauses and shoots, and the target also moving, and I recall there wasn't even like a very obvious or visible weapon present. So anyway, there's some, that's just another example of it's actually an example of that the shooting itself was pretty effective, or well in control, but but it can be done. Like if you're not, I guess what I'm saying is, and I apologize, I'm being distracted because I just realized I locked my wife out of the house before we started the podcast. I'm going to excuse myself here momentarily, and we'll cut this out of the audio part of the podcast. She's messaging me and like, hey, because I locked the child-proof latch, which is a habit. It's good, when you have little kids, you got to keep them secured. But just to wrap up that thought, so like we see officer-involved shooting examples where there's a lack of control and discipline for the shots, and they may be justified, but we have the potential for missing those shots and putting others at risk, or not putting down the threat in an effective enough manner or quickly enough, right? And then there's examples too where officers are well in control, and I could pick from examples where they demonstrate excellent control and discipline in their shots, but that one just came to mind where that officer displayed actually pretty remarkable shooting control, but it may not have been the best shoot overall anyway.
Yeah. Well, do you want to go unlock the door, and I'll
Yes,
get with
I will do that now.
I got some ideas for while you're gone for those that are listening live. This probably won't make it to the air, but the one that shows up on the podcast feeds. But if you're listening, and we have several of you guys listening, leave some comments where you're listening, where you're listening from, any questions that you have. This would be a good time to drop those in the comment section. So we can get those sorted out. We got a little break, and Riley's given us a break to actually talk. So so drop some questions in there. We're gonna obviously go a little deeper on this topic, but these shooter ready challenges are a good opportunity to ask kind of open-ended questions, because the topic can be pretty wide, and so. This would be a great time to drop some questions in the comments section. Oh, you're back. That was quick.
Yeah. So now on the competitive side of things, we see examples. I've experienced it myself, but a lot of times when shooters get involved in the competitive shooting sports for the first time, you'll see, like, at first people tend to be pretty careful, because they're learning this new sport, if you will, and just trying to get familiar with the rules, the way it's operated, get comfortable with running a course of fire that can be sometimes rather complex with targets in all sorts of directions. One of the pieces of advice I often give newer competitors is, well, first and foremost, just be safe in your first match, right? As we see mistakes sometimes happen. That's even then it's relatively rare, but sometimes it happens where a shooter turns the wrong direction or is not mindful of the 180-degree rule, which is keeping the muzzle downrange within 180 degrees of the back berm. And so, advice is, hey, be safe and then have fun and just focus on being safe and learning how to shoot a USPSA or IDPA stage safely and get through it. But very quickly, I see shooters that get comfortable after a time, after they kind of get the idea of it down, and then they start ramping up the speed because, you like going fast. It's fun. It's exhilarating. You get a little bit of an adrenaline rush, of, hey, this is a fun shooting game, and now I'm going to let it rip a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's actually really interesting when you see competitive shooters. It looks like they burn a stage down. They just, having fun and just, they get through it and blasting everything, in a pretty timely fashion. And sometimes what you'll see is that actually they do an okay job on some of the more difficult shots, because those shots actually like get their attention and sort of like force them to slow down and be like, oh, this is a relatively small target with most of it obscured by a no shoot target, or something like that, or maybe it's a steel target that's 20 yards away and you got to just exercise a little bit more care. But then as you look at some of the closer up open targets, just wide open targets, you'll see either really poor hits, meaning not very many alphas, see lots of Charlies and maybe even some deltas, or even see some misses, or we call them mics, on the close-up targets. And that happens because they are basically seeing brown, because a lot of times these, and don't take this as like a racial thing or anything like that, right? But USPSA targets made out of standard cardboard, right? And so they'll see, we call it just blasting, 2 at brown, because you just see the brown color of the cardboard target, and you're like, yeah, bam, 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 And so shooters are sometimes disappointed when they get, they get done and they're like, oh man, that was awesome. And then they hear the ROs calling out hits, and it's like Alpha Mike, Charlie Delta, 2 Charlie, Delta Mike on like some of the easiest targets. And it's like, whoa, what the heck happened there? And so that's another example. Like it happens more commonly than you'd think. Perhaps I've experienced it, as in my earlier on in my shooting journey. And every once in a while, I'll still have a miss on a really close target, and that's usually just a factor of just transitioning a little bit too quickly on or off a target. But it doesn't happen nearly as much as what it once upon a time did for me. But the reason that happens again is because you see, hey, big brown cardboard target, guns there, let it rip, 1 2. And it also is kind of, a lot of times it's a single sight picture and 2 shots, so like a true double tap, and that's not ideal either. I've learned a lot about discipline and making sure that I'm giving each target respect. Now I might not have to see a lot in my sight picture on a close 3-yard USPSA target, but I still need to like get my eyes locked onto the center of that and hold myself accountable for 2 shots, seeing the gun lift to return before I move to the next one. And so anyway, the point is just to talk about some examples of how we see in the real world examples of people just blasting away at a threat target, but also in the competitive world, we see that happen quite often as well. We see it happen, and again, this all started with the Steel Challenge competition of Smoke and Hope with 4 large, very close steel targets, and sometimes those are where the misses actually occur because we're just not actually following the process of getting hits on those targets.
Yeah, and obviously this is a Shooter Ready Challenge episode, so we're talking about doing this in dry fire, but clearly, I mean, the Steel Challenge is done in live fire. But I think I went back. You mentioned that there's a lot of videos many videos that you can access on the Shooter Ready Challenge website. We've been doing this, I didn't realize this, since October of 2019, every month since October 2019, and it's March of 2023. We've been doing
3.5 years.
Yeah. So 3.5 years worth of videos. And so, and sometimes there's overlap and there's some, and with anything, right, we're talking about like, in this drill, in this steel challenge, we're talking about, transitions and throttle control. And those are fundamentals that you'll see in many other Shooter Ready challenges in different ways. But if you go on there, I appreciate that you this month that when you ran this drill through dry fire, you're obviously using LASR, the shot reporting software, but you used a cool fire trainer, which is really cool. It allows you to use a striker fire gun, simulate recoil, and with that laser adapter or attachment, you can actually get an impulse, a laser, shot, so you can get repeated shots. The cool fire trainer is expensive, right? So not everybody probably has one. Cert gun would obviously be a good alternative because you can get repeated laser hits. They're not super expensive, they're relatively expensive. They're not cheap. But you also mentioned, and I maybe you can go a little deeper on this, but like how you're breaking down this Steel Challenge by using a laser dot where, even with the striker fire gun, you're only going to get one laser impulse, but you can set it up to, you start on one target at the beep, you transition to the next target and you're getting your splits. And so even if you can't do the whole, Steel Challenge in aggregate, you can break it down into, smaller, regardless of whatever kind of gear you have at your home right now, you can do this and get better at it. And I think that's really cool. So I appreciate that you gave multiple ways to do this. So, you're not just saying, hey, you got to buy this $400 kit to
Right.
run this drill.
Well, it's been important to us since the beginning of Shooter 8 Challenge is to present dry fire ideas and drills and things in a manner that as many people as possible hopefully could actually use them. And you don't have to have the laser app software
Sure.
to participate in these Shooter 8 Challenge drills either. That they're not, it's nice to have, I think, as far as measuring metrics. But ultimately, we just want people to be doing dry fire, and you can go through all the same things that we do in any of these Shooter 8 Challenge videos, but just do them, in dry fire, just the old-fashioned way with your gun. No laser dot trainer, no software, no webcams. Just put some targets up on the wall and do the dry fire thing, man. Like it's like dry fire is dry fire. It's cool that we're in a time and a day and an age where we have all kinds of cool technology available to us, both on the software front and the hardware front as well. But just to touch on that a little bit more for those listening, even though I use the Coolfire trainer, which uses compressed gas to reciprocate the gun, you replace the barrel and recoil spring assembly in your actual live gun. It's completely safe, of course, to do. You put the Coolfire barrel in your gun, you put their recoil spring and assembly in your gun, you reassemble your gun. They even sell a laser module that you can screw onto the end of that, and it recognizes, it actually is the laser is fired by the pickup of vibration from the initially, actually, from it. You'd think it's from the gun moving, but actually it's sensitive enough that when the striker release or the hammer releases, it will activate that laser. So that laser is activated before the gun even starts to move. And so I'm using that fancy tool, and Coolfire is awesome because I can get repeated shots with simulated recoil. The thing I appreciate the most with that is it disrupts my sight picture and forces me to reacquire the sights. And that requires also having somewhat consistent grip control, if you will. And so it's not a perfect system, but it's not bad, and it's fun, and it mixes it up. But yeah, it's $300+ to get into that system. I think it is close to 400 once you add the laser module. And I don't use it all the time, but I do use it periodically in my dry fire when I want the benefits that come from using it, which is what I just described: a disrupted sight picture from shot to shot with some amount of simulated recoil control. And so, it's cool. But guess what? Back to what you were just touching on. While I use that with the Laser X software to see, and I use the Laser app printed target as well, which is done to scale. As long as you're standing the appropriate distance away from it, it shows the 5 targets from that Steel Challenge stage, Smoke and Hope. And you program those targets. Actually, the software does a great job of auto picking those up when you launch it and programming those targets in. And that's great. And if you have the software, one thing you could do, like you just mentioned, is if you just have a laser dot trainer, that's the little laser cartridge. I did have one here recently, but little tiny thing, right? About the size of a cartridge, inserts into the chamber of your gun, is fired, quote unquote, by the striker or hammer, and fires off a laser, a brief intermittent laser. And that's great. You can use that with the software. And if you don't have a reciprocating gun or a resetting gun or a SIRT pistol, like you just mentioned, I can still get a lot of the same data. I can start with my gun aimed in on one target and practice a near transition, and on the beep of the software, transition over to my next target and hit the trigger. And that'll give me the time it took me to do that transition. I can do that doing a wide transition and compare that to the short or narrow transition. I could even simulate, and it wouldn't be perfect, but it would get you somewhat close and still be kind of somewhat fun. But if I wanted to shoot that entire Steel Challenge stage, I could just, half press the trigger on my first 4 targets and simulate those trigger presses and then go to my stop plate and then hit the trigger fully to fire the laser and have it capture what my theoretical time would be on the whole still challenge stage. So lots of, and I just mentioned that stuff so that people can think and be aware of, like, there's more than one way to approach this method of dry fire practice with things like laser software and being used and things of that nature. Question here from Guy Austin on Facebook. He says he's from Oklahoma, which is where the 2023 Guardian Conference will be. And I have something exciting to say with regards to that as part of answering this question. But he said, would force on force firearms training while simulated conflict, i.e., sim house, would it help civilian shooters with reacting under the pressure of someone firing back at them? And yeah, I absolutely think that would be beneficial, right? To be able to, I mean, absolutely. If you can get force on force training, you should absolutely do that. I think that is one of the better ways to get comfortable with keeping cool and staying process focused, even when faced with a threat. So, because even in simunitions or force on force type training, you don't want to get hit, and actually, there's a pain penalty a lot of times with those systems as well. May not be super significant, but there is a pain penalty. So, absolutely, you got to keep your cool and stay calm under fire and stay process focused. Process focused meaning that, okay, identify my threat, get my gun on that threat, see what I need to see in terms of sight confirmation, fire the shots I need to fire until I put that threat down. So absolutely. Now the thing I can tell you, Guy, and others, that I'm excited about is that for the first time at the 2023 Guardian Conference, we will have a force on force training block taught by Chris Seipert, who will be he'll actually be a new instructor for us this year, and he will be doing a force on force class. And I am super excited about that. In fact, I hope to have Chris on the podcast at a future date and time to talk about that a little bit and preview a little bit what we will see at the Guardian Conference this year. So that'll be a great opportunity for you, Guy, and others that would like to attend the Guardian Conference to come and actually get some force on force training.
Yeah, that is, I mean, Guy, it was a good little segue into there because, yeah, I didn't realize this is the first time I'm finding out about that course, and that's awesome because if you've never participated in legit force on force training where there is some sort of control over what's going on, I'm not talking about just like running around shooting people with paintballs, and there is some some benefit to that, but when it's kind of, it's directed in the sense that there are some parameters and put around how you're using the force on force and that kind of thing. It is eye-opening, and I think it's something that you can't experience no matter how you try to set up the range and do dry fire and do all these things. You can't you can't do certain things that you can on force and force, and you really start to see that there's more to surviving a shooting or performing well during a shooting than just fundamentals of shooting. And then so you see, like, I don't want to go off on a total tangent. Normally I leave that to Riley, but I'll do it just for a second. We like, there's a lot of people that will say, like, well, a lot of relatively untrained people are successful in shootings because they happen quick, or, close distances, in maybe the attacker isn't as well trained, or these types of arguments. And that might be true. I mean, there are certainly times where, people pick up guns that they don't train. They extend the gun towards the direction of the attacker, and they squeeze the trigger and hit the attacker. But you definitely start to see the difference in their approach and how that they they pick the right time to use the firearm, or they're they're using cover effectively where they don't get hit, increasing their chance of surviving even if they do get a hit on the other person, right? So like you start to see how the tactics, and I hate using that term, but the technique and that part of it marries up with the fundamentals of shooting, and it's just something you can't really reproduce in any other way. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, force on force training is about the closest we can get to actual gunfighting, right? Where we don't have people actually getting hurt, while doing it. So, uh, yeah, super, super good to be able to pursue if you have that opportunity. And again, we'll have a wonderful opportunity at the 2023 Guardian Conference. And so, shameless plug, hey, go sign up and get your tickets today. GuardianConference.com. I can tell you that the super early bird price is going away very, very soon, probably in the next few days or so. So I'd jump on that ASAP if you can. And we'd like to see you all. It'd be a great time. And Chris Seipert be one of our new instructors there. We'll have a couple other new instructors as well that I'm really excited about, and we'll be mentioning those and featuring some of them in the near future. But it's important to us to have some new and some different every year, actually, to have a healthy crop of instructors, if you will. I mean, where there's good variety, and we want some stuff the same, meaning that there's just good solid foundational training year to year to year that you can kind of know and count on being there, and also some things that will be a little bit new and different each time, and some new faces each time, so that we're exposed to additional perspectives and concepts and approaches, and that's a good thing. So
yeah, and I think if you guys are on the fence or anything like that, Riley, you mentioned that the tickets are going up, and that discounted pricing will go away, and so I mean, it's a great opportunity, and I'm really still kind of pumped about the whole force on force thing, because that's not something that you can typically do.
Yep.
It's just it's a different type of training that you can't typically do, and I'm super excited that that's going to be there.
Yeah. So anyway, to get kind of back more to the topic where we started, again, we started with this all focused on the idea that it's important that we don't just, that we don't disrespect targets, even when they seem to be easy or relatively close. It's even on close targets, it's really important. And this is how this works, guys and gals. If you want to get consistent, reliable hits on target at speed, including with quick transitions, and keep in mind, tracking a moving target is a form of transition. So, I'm not just talking about competition games here where you got, numerous targets and you're shooting them John Wick style. I'm talking like if you need to get reliable hits on center mass of a target, even at close distance, and if that target's moving, which they often can be, that's no different than a transition. So what is really important is that we select and get our eyes on a specific aiming point on that target and bring the gun to where our eyes are converged. If that does not happen, and I'll tell you, this is scientifically proven. If you go research anything that Dr. Joan Vickers has done with quiet eye research and quiet eye theory, there's some things from Force Science Institute that touch on the same sort of thing, but it is not uncommon for people to have their eyes saccade a little bit. That means that they don't really fixate their gaze on a specific point, that it's just kind of floating around, if you will, on a target. And if that's what you're experiencing when trying to shoot a gun, you will get inconsistent results. You'll get inconsistent hits on target. If there are transitions involved, you're going to have some shots that miss their mark, because if your eyes don't, if your gaze does not fixate on a specific point and then bring that gun to that point where you keep the eye there and the gun there while it's fired, you're going to have less than desirable results. It's just a fact. So, yeah, like this is, we started off talking with talking about Still Challenge and the Smoke and Hope stage, and how misses happen a lot of times on the close, easy targets, and it's because they are disrespected. And by disrespect, I mean that we think that they're easy, so we don't give them the same visual value that's required of any other target, meaning that we tend to gloss over them with our eyes, and we send 2 quick shots and we think we're good, and then we move on, and we find out when we check hits, we're like, nope, not good. So it's super, super important. So this brings us down to how important it is to stay with the process of getting those hits on target, and what that process is. And this was introduced by Brian Enos in his book, Practical Shooting, way back when, where he says, locate the target. That's step 1. That's a visual process primarily. Okay. So locating the target, that implies we're identifying a target, right? So this applies whether it's a defensive shoot or a competition one, doesn't matter. Got to locate and identify that target, get the eye on the target, and specifically on a specific point on that target. Then we get the gun on the target. Okay. And that's also primarily a visual process as well, because how do we know, Matthew, how do we know when the gun's on target?
I'm sorry?
How do we know when the gun's on target?
Yeah, our sights will confirm it.
There you go. There's got to be some kind of visual feedback through the gun that says, my eyes are on target. Now is my gun on target? If I see some kind of aiming or sight reference on target, then that tells me, yep, I'm on target. And then the third part of the process is keep the gun on target while I press the trigger.
Yeah. I had a question for you, because we've talked about this offline, and I know you've done a lot of research on this, and we kind of come up with some ideas. But like for somebody who's listening, and we're talking about the importance of having that, getting used to picking out a spot on the target. What are some techniques that you've used to better train that aspect of it? Because it is a visual thing. It's something that you can work on even without your firearm. And so what would be some tips that you would give somebody who's struggling with that, or this is a new concept?
Yeah. So it's funny because I actually just was on somebody else's podcast earlier today, and this very same thing came up as a topic of discussion. The first thing I think is to be aware of what your eyes are doing at all times. Just to simply be aware, because most of us don't think about what our eyes are doing or how we're looking at things or where specifically we're looking. Like we just tend to, we've been, for those of us that are blessed to have been so, which is most of us, born, so from birth, blessed with the ability to see and take in visual information, we tend to just look and intuitively, without much conscious thought at all, sort of like breathing, right? We don't think about breathing until I say something, and then you're like, oh yeah. Like you can be conscious of your breathing, but you tend not to think about it. The same is true of our eyesight. We don't really think about how we are looking or taking in visual information. We just do it, and we take it for granted to a large extent, right? So the first step, I think, is just becoming consciously aware of how you are utilizing your eyes and your vision to take in information. Okay. And part of that is you can, like right now, I could look at my screen here, I could pick something like, I don't know, here's this icon. Okay. So I could look at that icon and I can just sort of take it in generally, or I can drill down more specifically. It's like the old aims, classic aim small, miss small concept, right? Which is kind of what we're talking about here, where I can just look generally at that icon, or I can be more consciously aware of how I'm looking at it, and I can get more specific. And so actually the icon I'm looking at on my screen is our logo, our company logo. You see it in the upper screen of our video here for those of you watching. Okay. And I can look at that and take it all in generally, or I can get more specific. And in the very center of that, you'll see the words concealedcarry.com are superimposed over top of that. And I can look more and more specifically at that, including focusing on like the letter L, for instance, or the gap between the L and the E. If you want to get really specific, I could try to look at the little space in the triangle in the letter A, and like not even just the triangle, but look at the tip of that triangle. You see what I mean? So like we can try to be more consciously aware of how specifically we are converging our eyes on a point and taking that information in. Okay, so I think that's like step one of training your eyes on how to do this kind of thing. Another great example is just putting Post-it notes up around a room or your house. And you can start by, putting like a little dot or a small square or something in the center of them, just to make it a little bit easier for your eyes to have something specific to focus on. But eventually, I would think of that, that dot in the center of that Post-it note as being training wheels. And I eventually want to take that away. And after I've gotten, really good at shifting my eyes from Post-it note to Post-it note to Post-it note, and focusing on the center of that, on whatever dot or triangle or star or whatever I put in the middle of it, but then take that focus point away, and then really try to be hyper visually aware of, am I getting my eye now to the center of that sticky note? They're just yellow or orange or pink or purple in color. It's all the same, color field, and it's more challenging than you realize to get your eye to look at the precise middle, or even just a specific point in the middle of that color field when you don't have a specific point or object on which to fixate. But that's a really good practice, is to be able to do that. And that will help you, I think, as well with things like acquiring targets and fixating, specifically on an aim point on those targets. Yeah, those would probably be two tips. I could give some more things, but I actually do quite a bit of dry fire in my life now, just visually, of just practicing the idea of getting my eye from thing to thing to thing, and trying to make sure that I'm looking at the center or the very middle of that thing.
Yeah. And what you're describing, we're talking about one target, but what you're describing is really a key element of transitions. And we talked about it before, is like your eyes have to lead the gun slightly, right? And so when you're transitioning from one target to another, that's what you're doing. You're picking up that spot on that target, and the gun is following behind ever so slightly, and so you're kind of bringing the gun to bear on that spot. And so what you're explaining is something that we can use on single targets or transitions, which goes right back to our challenge. So
yeah. And to be clear, and we've talked about this before, but ideally, like for maximum efficiency in transitions, after we're done shooting target A, let's say, and we got to go to target B, like eyes and gun, before the gun has fully recovered and gone back into battery, ideally, eyes and gun can leave target A simultaneously. But by nature of, the fact that moving my eyes from point A to point B really doesn't take much effort and can happen really, really fast, and that moving the gun is more of a physical act that's going to take some amount of effort / time, your eyes will beat the gun to the next target. But the point is, it's not like we shoot target A and then leave the gun there while the eyes go to target B and then move the gun. When I say leading the gun with eyes, it's really important that we are specific in our understanding that ideally it's I shoot target A, and when I see my sights lift on target A, that tells me shots fired. I can call a shot based on that information, and then instantaneously eyes and gun should start moving now to target B, and eyes will get there before the gun, but it's important that they actually get to a specific point, because then the gun can come to where the eyes are looking. When we don't have a specific aim point, that's where we tend to see particularly over transitioning, or when we move our eyes in a lackadaisical fashion, meaning that like we move eyes and gun, but we kind of track the gun with the eyes. That also will lead to poor transitions, because basically subconsciously we have all the tools we need mentally, cognitively, to look at a point and bring a gun over and have everything subconsciously decelerate at the appropriate time to bring that gun in line with where the eyes are converged. But if our eyes aren't converged on a very specific point, then we don't know where to start decelerating and where to stop the gun. And so then we end up with sloppy transitions.
Yeah, that's awesome. Good stuff, man.
So we're about out of time. Kind of talked all around all kinds of things, all somewhat related. And, ultimately, again, comes down to don't blast away at targets, shoot the targets. And the way we shoot the targets is by sticking to and abiding by the process of shooting, which is locate the target, get the gun on target, and then keep it there while we press the trigger. And if we fail to follow that process, we will not get desired results. And that has to be done even under stress sometimes, with a great degree of discipline, which is not, I'm not going to say it's easy to do. It's not, but it's important to do if we want to have maximum success. So good luck to you. And that's part of the reason why we do dry fire. And hopefully you find value in things like Shooter Ready Challenge, so that you get ideas for dry fire and how to conduct it better.
Yeah. And you can also, if you participate, you can also win different prizes, monthly prizes, and things like that. So it benefits you all different ways.
Yeah, in fact, at the bottom, if you go to shooterreadychallenge.com and go to the bottom of the page, you'll see the place to put in your first name and email address. That's it. And this doesn't add you to any other mailing list. This adds you to the you'll get emails from us at concealcarry.com, but specifically you'll get emails with regards to the Shooter Ready Challenge. All right. And you'll get notified when new challenges are up and published. You'll get notified if, and you want to be on that mailing list, if you want to have an opportunity to win monthly prizes. So that's where you go to do that. Again, this month's Shooter Ready Challenge and today's episode is sponsored by laserapp.com, LASRAPP.com, and by barrelblock.com. That is spelled BARRELBLOK.com. Barrel Block, no C, just Barrel Block with a K. And we appreciate our sponsors and your support of our sponsors to make what we do here possible. And so it's time, I think, to bid you all adieu until next time. Matthew, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir. And thank you guys for listening. We really appreciate it.
And so until next time, a reminder to train right, train often, and train safe so you can fight hard, fight fast, and fight true. Take care.